I'm going to live here with my eldest son, his wife, and my grandchild." John declared this loudly, puffing out his chest with confidence. Behind him, Michael and Linda smirked at me maliciously. How can they be so selfish? I felt dizzy, but more than that, I couldn't stand the thought of my happiness being threatened. It must have shown on my face. Michael, as if to deliver the final blow, taunted me. "If you resist, I won't take care of you." I don't remember raising a child like this, but I regret that it's come to this. Still, I pretended to take the bait and firmly stated, "Then I'll leave." No one there expected that response. They stared at me, faces blank with surprise. Then John, coming to his senses, pointed at me and started yelling. "You're leaving? If you do that, you'll be out on the streets. If you think you're threatening me, think again." I could tell his words were a bluff by the sweat on his forehead. So I looked straight at John with a bold demeanor. "My name is Emma Young, a 53-year-old remote worker. I met John, my husband, when I started working and married him after several years of dating. Shortly after we got married, I got pregnant and had a healthy boy, Michael. Michael is now married and has a child of his own. John used to be very kind, always caring for me. But a few years after our marriage, his attitude began to change. After quitting my job to become a full-time homemaker following childbirth, John's treatment of me grew colder, and I was often treated harshly. I considered divorce several times, but couldn't decide because Michael was still a baby. I thought raising a child needed cooperation, but that ideal was quickly shattered. If Michael cried at night, John would click his tongue, and if I couldn't prepare his breakfast due to lack of sleep, he would yell at me early in the morning. Despite this, I couldn't help but look forward to seeing Michael grow up. When Michael began to understand things, it was a joy to see who he would call first, me or John. I won that small battle. Knowing this, John started to engage more with Michael. For example, he would entertain Michael while I cooked, or he would willingly bathe him. As a result of John's continued indulgence, Michael, contrary to my hopes, began to mimic John's behavior. Once Michael could do things on his own, he became more mischievous. When I scolded him, he would retort with John's words. When Michael didn't clean up his toys after playing, I told him to tidy up, and he snapped back. "Shut up! If you want it cleaned up so badly, ask more nicely." Then, after I properly scolded him face to face, he would clean up with a disgruntled face, but soon he'd be back to his old ways. I worried he would become a nuisance to others and talked to John about it, but he said, "He's a boy, he needs to be energetic. He'll behave once he's older." Indulging him like this, Michael grew up mischievous. There were countless difficulties, but somehow, I managed to raise him until he graduated from college. It seemed like neither John nor Michael understood my struggles, and I felt burdened with unreasonable feelings as Michael started living alone. Honestly, when Michael left, I felt relieved and returned to living with just John in our house. Until then, Michael's presence had distracted me from John's bad behavior. But now, in the suddenly quiet house, John's negative traits stood out more. His attitude hadn't changed since our marriage years ago, but his unreasonable behavior now took a toll on my mental health. One day, when I was almost fed up, Michael brought a woman home. He said she was his fiancée and they were planning to get married soon. I was overjoyed that Michael, who had been nothing but trouble, was getting married. His fiancée, Linda, appeared strong-willed but was soft-spoken and very polite. She seemed an unlikely match for Michael, but I had no complaints since she chose him. John also approved of their marriage right away. They planned to live in Michael's current apartment after marriage, not with us, but the thought of a lively future made me happy. "I know things are gonna get tough for you guys, so feel free to rely on me." They had both been living alone until now, but they would be living together from now on. I wanted to be a support for them, expecting they might face various challenges. But after they got married, they frequently visited, taking over the living room from morning till night, joining us for shopping only to add unnecessary items to the cart and leave me to pay. I started to feel fed up with Michael and Linda's behavior. Then, when Michael and Linda, who used to frequent our house, suddenly stopped visiting, I received a surprising call. "Hey, listen to this. We're having a baby." Michael sounded ecstatic over the phone. John and I congratulated them on their first grandchild. "Good job, Michael. So, when's the baby due?" "What? Didn't you hear me? The baby's here, that's why I'm calling from the hospital." It turned out Michael was announcing not a pregnancy, but the birth of their child. Shocked, we rushed to the hospital to see our grandchild. After that whirlwind of events, Michael and Linda started visiting often again. It was great seeing my grandchild, but they would leave me with the baby and go out. And to top it off, they'd say, "Emma, the baby's fine with just milk, thanks." "Yeah, lucky to have you, Mom. It's great to have someone to leave the baby with when we go out." They'd laugh as they left me with the baby. Actually, I had started working from home around that time. When Michael brought Linda over, I proposed to John that we leave this house. "What are you talking about? If we do that, where will we live?" John complained immediately, but I quickly countered with a new proposal. "Let's build a new house. Don't worry, I'll also work from home. My parents are getting older, and I'm thinking of living with them. Let's give this house to Michael and Linda, and we can live in a new one." Living together would mean we'd need a house of a certain size and layout, but I convinced him that by combining his income and mine, we could reach our goal. Reluctantly, he agreed, and I began working from home right away. Even when I was tasked with caring for my grandchild or dealing with John's unreasonable outbursts, I never missed a day of work. During these times, the moment finally came to realize my dream. John, albeit reluctantly, agreed to save money for a new house to live with my parents. He wouldn't cooperate unless I pushed him, and I faced more unreasonable behavior. But reaching our goal made all that seem insignificant. "John, we've finally reached our goal. I'm going to see my parents now to discuss moving forward." I had been talking to John about the new house, but now I could have a proper discussion with my parents involved. Leaving a grumbling John behind, I headed to my parents' place. Despite multiple intrusions from Michael and Linda, just the thought of living soon in a new house with my parents brightened my mood. My work was going well, and I was finally able to purchase the house I had always wanted. I reported this to John, looking forward to the day of the handover. Then, on the day of the handover, as I was about to step into the house, excited, a moving truck suddenly stopped by. Stunned, I watched as the movers began unloading. And I hurriedly stopped them. I hadn't heard of such arrangements, and neither our nor my parents' belongings had been moved in yet. Whose belongings were they trying to move in? The confused mover and I were trying to understand the situation, when a loud voice came from somewhere. "What are you doing, meddling in things?" The voice belonged to John, and as I turned around, relieved to hear him, I realized the words were directed at me. I realized that those words were directed at me. John gestured dismissively at me as if I were a nuisance, while Michael and Linda were talking to the moving company staff. Then John came over to me and said this. "We're going to live here with our eldest son, his wife, and our grandchild." John announced this loudly, chest puffed out with confidence. Michael and Linda stood behind him, smirking at me maliciously. How could they be so selfish? I felt dizzy, but more than that, I couldn't stand the thought of my happiness being threatened. That must have shown on my face. Michael, as if to deliver the final blow, taunted me. "If you resist, I won't take care of you." I don't remember raising a child like this, but I regretted that it had come to this. Still, pretending to take the bait, I firmly stated, "Then I'll leave." No one there expected that response. They just stared at me, faces blank with surprise. Then John, coming to his senses, pointed at me and started yelling. "You're leaving? If you do that, you'll be out on the streets. If you think you're threatening me, think again." I could tell his words were a bluff by the sweat on his forehead. So I looked straight at John with a bold demeanor. However, my attitude was in vain, as John smirked, regaining his composure. That's right, exactly. I'm supposed to be the owner of this house. Wasn't that the agreement? Indeed, the new house was in John's name. But the purpose of building this new house was to live with my parents, and there were supposed to be other conditions too. Yet, why does John feel so entitled? When I first discussed building a new home with living with my parents in mind, John naturally brought up Michael. Going forward, it's Michael and his family who will live the longest. Wouldn't it then be better to build the new house for Michael and his family? That was a reasonable opinion, but I wanted them to achieve this on their own. So, I persistently persuaded John until he reluctantly agreed. That's why the new house was designed with as many barrier-free features as possible, geared towards my parents. Since marrying John, I hadn't spent much good time. But now that Michael is married, I should be able to live as I please. I've spent so much time on John and Michael, neglecting my parents. Now it's time to give back to them. Lost in these thoughts, I must have been glaring at John and the others. Realizing this, John mocked me. What's with that defiant look? Struck a nerve and now you're speechless, huh? His words infuriated me. I've put up with so much and resigned myself to his behavior until now. But this time, I couldn't just let it go. Even when John, who was once kind, changed his attitude completely. Even when Michael, imitating John, hurled harsh words at me. Even when John got angry, yelled, threw tantrums, or ignored me on a whim. Even when Linda clearly treated me disrespectfully and dumped childcare on me. I had endured all this patiently. But now, it wasn't just about me, it involved my parents too. And to have it so easily taken over like this was unbearable. Fed up, I couldn't hold back anymore. Enough is enough. This house was supposed to be for me and my parents, and you, wasn't it? Technically, you're the owner, but strangely, the bank account for the payments is only Michael's. Who prepared everything up to this point, huh? Yes, the condition for building this house was that it would be in John's name. I understood that. It's better for appearances. But strangely, only Michael was making the loan payments. John claimed he wanted it to look like Michael bought the house. So it seemed like he was doing a good deed for my parents. But I never understood the reason behind this arrangement. However, as long as I could live with my parents, I was okay with any form. So, although it didn't sit well with me, I agreed. Little did I know it would turn out like this. As I stated my case, John, Michael, and Linda all smirked in the same way. That's when I realized it. John had planned from the start to make this house his own. I was like a worker ant, gathering materials and building the nest, only to be manipulated at the last moment. When the house was completed and it was time to move, I realized this and snapped. Then, I presented John with the divorce papers I had kept hidden for years. I had prepared them over a decade ago. When Michael was in high school and away at a sports camp. John and I went out to dine, having the house to ourselves for a change. During the meal, we bumped into one of John's colleagues and had a bit of small talk. When the colleague tried to excuse himself, hurrying the conversation, John said something awful. Don't worry about it. Eating out with her is just boring, but I'm the kind husband, playing along. We don't even have a reservation. Maybe I'll send her home and go for a drink. Can't stand looking at her old face. John's colleague left with a forced smile, clearly uncomfortable. I was shocked by the verbal abuse thrown at me in public. Pretending nothing happened, we continued the meal, but I couldn't even remember its taste. The next day, I went to the office to get a divorce form. When I showed it to John, he was momentarily surprised, but then smirked. Nice preparation. You know your stuff. Oh, finally realizing your place, are you? Thought you'd understand sooner, but glad you made it this far. And to think you understand you're disposable, how smart of you. Exactly. You really get it, Mom. Keep working and pay for our house, okay? All three of them, John, Michael, and Linda, laughed at me condescendingly, and Michael snatched the divorce form. He handed it to John, who began filling it out, humming a tune. It was clear from his attitude that John didn't remember anything he had done to me, not just from that night but all the years prior. He might even start claiming he did nothing wrong. After filling it out, John waved the form at me, smirking. I snatched it, quickly put it in my bag, and took out my phone. I opened the recording app and held it up in front of them. Emma, you're scary. Gathering evidence for divorce now is too late, you know. Ignoring Linda's mocking laughter, I confirmed with John. I want no alimony or property division, just don't contact me again. Sure. If you do, I'll hire a lawyer and demand alimony. Yeah. John responded nonchalantly, laughing throughout. I wondered how someone could be so brazen. Trying to keep my temper in check, I turned to Michael and stated clearly. And Michael, now that our marital ties are severed, our parent-child relationship is over too. Ah, okay. They both responded. Well, that's all I needed. We'll likely never meet again, so take care of yourselves. I stopped the recording and decided to leave. Neither John, Michael, nor Linda seemed to grasp the reality of their future. Without anyone stopping me, I went to the office to file the divorce papers. 3 days after filling out and submitting the rest of the divorce papers at the office. While I was packing up with my parents for the move, John called me. Just the other day, I told him not to contact me again, or I'd hire a lawyer and sue for emotional distress. But he must have had a reason to contact me so desperately. However, now that we're divorced, it's no longer my concern. Busy with packing, I decided to ignore the call. But just as I thought John's call had ended, Michael called me next. Both of them reaching out must mean something serious is going on, but it's none of my business. I ignored both calls and continued working, but the constant ringing was too distracting. Reluctantly, I answered when John called again, and immediately, I heard his pitiful voice. Help me, Emma, I can't stop the calls from the bank and Michael. With that one sentence, I understood what John and Michael were going through and sighed in exasperation. I answered wearily. I don't know anything about that. It's no longer my concern. John shouted back at me in a voice as loud as he could muster. You heartless woman! No matter what he said, it was absurd for him to complain to me given their situation. Honestly, I couldn't care less what happens to them. More importantly, do you remember the promise we made just the other day? I deliberately sighed audibly before reiterating. Though it was already too late since John had contacted me. What promise? As expected, he seemed to have forgotten. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. The one where I said I'd hire a lawyer and sue for emotional distress if you contacted me. I never heard such a thing. Whether you listened or not, I definitely said it, and you responded. No, I didn't. I wouldn't easily agree to such nonsensical terms. John was vehemently denying it, but I had anticipated such a claim. That's why I had recorded the conversation. It's recorded, so you can't escape this. Please, forgive me. If this continues, both Michael and I will be lost. John's voice was even weaker than when he first called, pleading with me. But considering everything that's happened, there's no way I could forgive him. Absolutely not, I'm going to consult a lawyer now. I flatly rejected him, but John, who only accepts convenient truths, persisted. Let's get back together, okay? I bluntly replied to John's absurd suggestion. In your dreams. I was surprised at how cold my own voice sounded. I then hung up and blocked John's number. That should ensure no further contact from John. Feeling relieved, I was about to resume packing when my phone rang again. Wondering what it was now, I checked and saw Michael's name. I had completely forgotten in the heat of the moment with John, but Michael must also be receiving numerous calls from the bank. He seemed to be reaching out to me for help, just like John. I thought about not answering, but decided to enlighten him about society and answered the call. Mom, please help me. I keep getting these crazy calls from the bank, and Dad won't answer his phone. His voice was as pitiful as one could imagine. Having to deal with the same issue twice in one day was too much for me. So, I decided to be brief and sent him the recording before he could say anything more. Your father is that kind of person. Also, I've just sent you a recording of something important, so listen to it and understand. With that said, don't contact me again. You and I are strangers now. After hearing what I said, Michael was yelling something on the other end of the phone, but I hung up without listening. Then, just like I did with John, I blocked his number and went back to my packing. Once I finished a phase of the packing, I headed to the law office. I explained the whole situation and decided to sue John, Michael, and of course, Linda for emotional distress. To be honest, considering there's a child between Michael and Linda, I thought about going easy on them. But thinking back to what happened 3 days ago and everything before that, I just couldn't let it go. I hoped this would be a good opportunity for them to learn about the harsh realities of society. So, I didn't hold back and went through with the full claim. As a result, John was demoted and took a pay cut after this incident became known at his company. Apparently, it became so uncomfortable for him there that he resigned voluntarily. I heard from my lawyer that he's now juggling day jobs to pay the alimony. As for Michael and Linda, their schemes failing led to a huge fight. Linda even brought up divorce. But with a child to consider and unable to afford the alimony on her own, she gave up on the idea. Their home is probably as cold as ever now. I couldn't help but laugh, thinking they didn't have to follow in their father's footsteps so closely. Of course, Michael ended up getting fired due to the commotion. Now both he and Linda are working multiple jobs, sweating it out to pay the alimony. As for me, I went back to my parents' house and told them everything. We discussed what I should do next and decided I'd live with them. Together with my parents, we're now renovating the house to make it comfortable for the three of us. Because of this, we're currently staying somewhere temporarily. Since the divorce, I've been freed from all that mess, and thankfully, my work has been recognized, leading to an increase in my income. From now on, I'm going to work even harder and live a happy life. Being with my parents is now the greatest joy of my life.